Prior to early access launching, Dark and Darker was a fairly slow-paced game with a higher than average time to kill when compared to other extraction looters. A large component of the high time to kill was that players spent a large portion of the fight jockeying for positional advantage before actually committing to melee combat. Unless you were playing buffball compositions, which focused on the use of mage's haste and invisibility spells and buffing the barbarian, closing the gap between groups was actually sort of difficult to do without taking a bunch of damage from arrows and fireballs. I think this was mainly due to characters having a lack of movement speed options, and it seemed like Iron Mace was supporting this slower paced, methodical type of combat. For example, how many times were mage's invisibility and haste nerfed until buffball stopped being effective? However, now that early access is here, and more specifically now that Bard 1.0 is here, the game's flow and pace has shifted dramatically. Movement speed is once again king, and time to kill is faster than ever. But this begs a question: is increasing the game's pace good for the game? Before we answer that question, let's focus on some examples I have from playing duos with a buddy of mine. I am a dual-wield fighter, and he plays Bard. Being that we were playing as a melee-focused duo, you might imagine that we would have trouble fighting other teams who have more players or more range damage options. Fortunately for us, that was almost never the case, and the reason was our insane movement speed. Not only does the dual-wield fighter have naturally good movement speed due to wearing leather armor, the fighter can also use the sprint skill, which dramatically increases their movement speed, almost by 20%. These combined factors alone possibly make the fighter Dark and Darker's fastest character, and significantly reduces the opponent's window to punish a charging fighter with range damage. When combined with the Bard's Accelerando song, the fighter is suddenly even faster and can close gaps at an astonishing rate. Often I found myself in the face of my opponents before they even knew they were in a fight. Additionally, the groups and players that did see us coming had very few options due to our aggression. They clearly had no chance to flee, couldn't use range damage to any effect, and couldn't match our melee damage. Once a fighter's Falchion starts chopping heads, there isn't much you can do to stop it. But it wasn't just me who was running in at crazy speeds. The Bard was usually right on my heels and peeling off to take care of flankers and supports. After playing for a few days like this, it became clear that the movement speed was responsible for our success. And honestly, it began to feel like we were pretty toxic for most players. If our opponents were new players or less geared than us, they were 100% dead with no counterplay. If they were about our skill level or had similar gear, they were still likely going to die despite often having numbers advantage. Only geared 3-man teams gave us any trouble, and we didn't even need to fight them given that our movement speed allowed us to disengage at any time. Looking at some of the other content on YouTube and Twitch, I'm finding that a number of other content creators and skilled players agree that movement speed is king, and is a necessary component of any group right now. Even Iron Mace seems to agree with their latest Bard nerfs. So let's get back to my original question: is increasing the game's pace good for the game? My honest answer is no. Increasing pace, especially through movement speed, is a bad idea. It unnecessarily punishes new or lesser geared players, and has very little counterplay. I think one of the original attractive qualities of Dark and Darker was I always felt that I had agency in my fights and that I could choose to engage or disengage depending on the situation. Running away was usually an option. Right now though, I feel like my opponents choose whether I engage or disengage, and the group's success is literally dependent on having the Bard's movement speed buffs. It just doesn't feel good, and I hope Iron Mace nerfs Bard's movement speed buffs even further. Ideally, I'd like to see the game slow down again and have the tactical, methodical gameplay return, rather than just holding down mouse 1 and W. That's it for now. Thanks for watching everyone. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the dungeon!